Good evening. I had to wait for my cue up there before I could get started. I am so excited about tonight's presentation, and I know you guys are just going to enjoy it to no end. I'll take a couple of housekeeping things out of the way first. John is going to be signing books afterwards. You can buy the book in the store, and he will be sitting at a table right outside the store, and he can sign it for you then. And there will be time for Q&A afterwards, but I would appreciate, I'm going to have the handheld mic, if you could raise your hand and I can come over with the mic, and that way everybody can hear the question, and then it will also be on the streaming video. Okay? I just have to say that you know you've made it when you want to get somebody's biography, and all you have to do is go to Wikipedia. And that's what I did with John. He's listed under Wikipedia. It just blew me away. John Mclean began his career in journalism in 1964 as a police reporter with the City News Bureau of Chicago. That alone was probably pretty exciting. In 1970, Maclean was assigned to the Washington Bureau of the Tribune. During his newspaper career, he spent more than a decade as the Tribune's diplomatic correspondent. He was one of the Kissinger 14, the journalists who regularly traveled with Secretary of State Henry Kissinger during the era of shuttle diplomacy. We're going to have you back to talk about that. Maclean was a Nieman Fellow in journalism at Harvard University for the 74-75 academic year and became the Tribune's foreign editor in Chicago in 1988. He resigned from the newspaper after the 1994 South Canyon fire on Colorado's storm King Mountain, killing 14 firefighters. He wrote the story of the fire in his first book, Fire on the Mountain, which in 2000 won the Mountains and Plains Bestsellers Award for the Best Nonfiction Book of the Year. The book was also featured in 2 documentaries by Dateline and the History Channel. Maclean has since written 4 more books on fatal wildland fires. An avid fly fisherman, go figure. He currently divides his time between Washington, D.C. and the family cabin at the edge of Seeley Lake, Montana. John's most recent book, Home Waters, A Chronicle of Family and a River, was published in 2021 and has been called a worthy companion to his father's book, A River Runs Through It, as well as a satisfying read on its own merits. The book won an honor award from the Montana Book Award Committee, who called it a gorgeous chronicle of a family and the land they call home, and that it is. Please welcome John N. Maclean.
Thank you, Deb, and thank you all for coming out on a day like this, a beautiful day. It's kind of hard to compete against the wild Montana skies, but when you come to the Historical Museum of Montana's History, you can, if you're lucky, spend a little time with Charlie Russell and gaze at when the land belonged to God, and also get a look at, one of the great paintings of all time. If you look at it very closely, if you get up very close, as I just did, it's disconcerting because it's almost impressionistic. It doesn't work. You get 10 feet back and the thing comes to life, and all the light and design of it and the reality of it are there. And I was thinking as I looked at it about great works of art, and I'm writing about one, lucky me, Ernest Hemingway's Big Two-Hearted River, which comes up for its centennial publishing anniversary in 2025. And I was trying to find a fresh way to describe Hemingway's writing style. Thousands have tried. And what I came up with was lyrical realism. And I'm going to have to spend some time defining that, but I think it also applies to Charlie Russell's great painting and to my father's writing, where you start with reality, but you very soon are stepping back into a lyricism that is not particularly formal. It isn't like poetic lyricism with regular stanzas, but it lifts you as the viewer or the listener to the subject and carries you into a very different realm. So we'll see how that goes. I was hoping that I could report to you on this occasion that an important piece of conservation legislation had proceeded to markup in a Senate Environmental Committee. I'm talking about the Blackfoot Clearwater Stewardship Act, which would provide 80,000 acres of wilderness, designate as wilderness, 80,000 acres, in the upper tributaries of the Blackfoot River, and thus save vital spawning and cooling water for the fish population. Once again, Montana Senator Daines has screwed it up. I don't know what he wants. I don't know why he does what he does, but he does it with great regularity. He has asked for a 1-month delay in markup. The bill's been around for 15 years. It's never gotten a markup. In the latest of many University of Montana polls on public opinion concerning that piece of legislation, which have always given it about a low to mid-70s approval rating from Montanans. Not exactly a state with one left-wing political stripe down the middle. Last time I did it, it came in with 83% approval rating. I listened to Senator Daines in November when the bill was brought up in the committee and discussed, and I couldn't figure out what he was talking about. He introduced the bill, which is the privilege of a state senator, a senator from the state that's affected by the bill. And when he got through, I was kind of shaking my head, and apparently others were too. And somebody from the Democratic side asked respectfully, Senator Daines, I can't figure out whether you're for this or against it. And Daines then proceeded to another handful of mush. And what he said was, I'd really like to see get something for this, a countervailing something, which he never defined. I'll be looking at this to see what I want. He's been looking at it for 15 years. The one time he came up with what he wanted the 300,000 acres that are in wilderness study in the state of Montana taken out of wilderness study and presumably returned to some kind of motorized use or greater access or whatever, but no longer any of it would be considered for wilderness. University of Montana did polling on that, and it flunked. An overwhelming majority of you guys, Montanans of every political stripe, didn't like that idea. Why he can't come up with something sensible as a compromise, which is what politicians are supposed to do, is beyond me. And I talk about this every time I get a chance. And the last time I talked about it down in Big Sky and in Livingston, there were people there who know him and said, well, we'll talk to him about this and see what's going on. I mean, if he's going to oppose 83% of Montanans on a bill that has been around for 15 years, you better have a reason for doing it. And he hasn't expressed it. And if you're a politician, you should be able to come up with a deal. That's what you do. So he's not representing his state, and he's not representing himself as a politician. Okay, that's the unpleasant part. In Livingston, I did that and talked about the book and went out to dinner with the bookseller, a wonderful woman who runs the Wheatgrass bookstore there. And we all were talking about, one thing or another, and got to the end of it, and it was pretty rough. He said, well, things are not going well in the country, and I said something that I kind of wish I hadn't said. I said, yeah, that's right, and they're not going to get better quick. And we were just about to get up, and somebody said, we can't leave on that note. And the bookseller said something very simple. And it's often the really simple things that sink in and stick with you. She said, we've got a right to feel good about some things. My hope is that home waters is one of those things. My father's book, A River Runs Through It, and the eponymous movie, which is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year, and Robert Redford is still out there doing stuff, changed the face of Montana and of the American West. It was an accelerant of trends that were already in place. Let's not get carried away with how much of an effect that had all by itself. People are coming out here. They certainly have arrived in great numbers during the pandemic because they can work from home for 6 hours and then go fishing. And when they came here, home prices weren't bad. And of course, they've stayed that way. Not. When you look at real estate prices in a place like Bozeman, where a 2-bedroom condo in downtown Bozeman goes for $1.3 or $1.4 million. You know, it isn't the guy who's changing tires down at the Exxon who's living there and was born in Montana and has a wife who works and 2 or 3 kids. It's somebody who came here from somewhere else. And they are spoiling a lot of things for Montana people. I have 2 friends that I found out just in the 10 days that I've been here who have had to leave where they were because they could not afford a house. One of them, a nice young gal, who happens, you ought to see her, she's about that tall and about that wide, and she loves 2-man saws. Hand saws, you know, the old kind. I gave her a couple that we had at the cabin that were used to build the cabin to fix up. And she's tuning them and fixing them. And she's from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So she got married, and she and her husband both work, and they moved back to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan because they could afford a house there, and they can't here. Another guy, a friend of mine, who is spearheading with the organization that is spearheading the drive to get the Blackfoot Clearwater Stewardship Act passed, had to move out of Missoula to Butte because he couldn't buy a house in Missoula. It's bad. Did we have something to do with that? I think we probably had very little to do with the latest bulge. But as the popularity of the West for the overabundance of people on the streams, yeah, we've had something to do with that. So I'm hoping that home waters has another effect. That first, that it does make people feel good to read it. That it brings back a time that is still capturable. You have to work for it. You have to work an awful lot harder to get it. But I sat on the porch of our cabin at Seeley Lake for a couple hours this morning, watching a doe and a fawn 10 feet away, because they're screened porch, so they don't see you through the screen. You know, if you just sit there quietly. And they played and played. And the boats haven't started, the motorboats haven't started up yet. They're just starting to arrive back at Seeley Lake, which is my cue to exit. I'm there early in the shoulders. I'm there early, and I'm there late. And I leave the summer to the jet skis. But it was beautiful on that porch. It was a gorgeous day. And it was a day very much like that a few years ago, where the sky was cloudless and the sun was like a meteor descending to Earth the way it can be out here, because there's nothing in the way of pollution in the air for the most part. And there was a heavy wind, as there was today. And I was about to fish the Muchmore Hole on the Blackfoot River. The Muchmore Hole is the one place on the Blackfoot that is identifiable as a hole that was fished by my dad in A River Runs Through It. There are others where you can get close, where you know, well, we know you're within a half a mile. But the Muchmore Hole is for sure. It begins with a long reef, very shallow, very rocky, and it goes on and on and on. It covers both sides all the way across the river. And then that volume of water is channeled into a very narrow space and dumps over a shelf so that there's a big roar, and then boom, there's this rapid that goes down, but it doesn't get all the way down, because at the end of the hole, the bottom comes up and it kicks the water off to the side, and it creates this great whirlpool. So on one side you have a rapid, and on the other side you have a great whirlpool, which is so continuous that it creates foam in a permanent way on top of it, and the fish love it. First of all, the insects love the rapid because it's shallow and rocky and they can breed there. And then they come to life and some of them drop into the water and then they pour into this hole. So it's an insect factory feeding a fish factory. And the fish come up into that foam and they nibble the stuff that's there and get a meal. And that's what my dad saw. He describes it perfectly. And he cast for this rainbow and he nailed him. And he landed him on a little spit of gravel bar that's still there. I mean, it's the Blackfoot River. The Blackfoot River doesn't change very much because it's jammed up against mountains, the Garnet Range. And it's just the holes that are there are going to be there next year for the most part. You can count on that. It's not like the Missouri River, where it wanders one way one year and another the next. Well, when I was a kid, my dad used to tell the story about this fish. And I thought this was great. Let's go. Go to the Muchmore hole. They said, well, it's over there beyond Ovando. You can't see it from Route 200. He said, I don't know the ranchers anymore. I can't get us in there. And so we never fished it, which was very frustrating to me. And so I was dreamed of fishing the Muchmore hole. Finally, a friend of mine, a businessman from Chicago who had read A River Runs Through It and loved it, made a business deal. He bought a potash mine and built it up and sold it. And the price of the ranch on the Muchmore hole, which had been far beyond his means initially, came within his means. And he bought the ranch, and he's since added a lot. And it's under a Nature Conservancy. And they've got other people in the Blackfoot Valley to do the same thing. Okay, they're rich guys, and they didn't start out here, but they have an ethic that I support, which is if you're going to come out here and do this kind of thing, make it better. Do something to make it better. Don't make it worse. Don't bring all the worst things that you used to do in the city, the carelessness, the checking things off on the life list, the rudeness, the excessive competition. Don't bring that out here. Come out here with a degree of reverence, because this can be lost. It looks like it can never be lost. It's so big. Yeah, you can lose it. This is very fragile. So anyway, my friend and I were going down to fish the Muchmore hole, although it was a lousy day to fish. The sun was too bright, the wind was too high, but it was a chance to do what I had dreamed about since I was young. We got down on the bank, and he went down to set up, and I was set up, and I took a great big October caddis dry fly and flipped it up into the head of the rapid a couple of times, almost practice casting, and blam! The biggest rainbow trout I've ever seen on the Blackfoot River smacked into the fly, and I hooked him. Well, he was porpoising out of the water, and my friend down below could see it. You see, the thing was really enormous. And he went over to a rubber boat that he keeps there tied up and got one of those two-handled nets, the great big ones, and waited out, and pretty quickly we were going to get the fish in. And that's a good thing. I wouldn't have had as long a fight as I wanted. We were certainly going to release them. And that's what you do now. It's catch and release now, which it wasn't when I was a kid. And you try to get the fish back in the water quickly because you don't want to exhaust them and ruin them and kill them. And if you read Home Waters, you'll find that there had been a previous episode where that's exactly what happened. But this time, it looked like it was going to be over quickly. So he dips down this shovel of a net, and the fish doesn't get in it. And I'm looking at, and he did it again, and he did it again. And I thought, what in the world is going on, Jay? you know, you're going to bang this fish and I'm going to lose it. No, you got a big net him. And finally he yelled back at me, he said, he's too big, I can't get him in the net. So I fought him a little while longer, and we finally got him tired enough that Jay got the net underneath him and picked him up, and half of him was outside the net. Now, when I tell this story in fishing groups, I can see the skeptical looks. Oh, bullshit. There's a picture of the fish in the book. He was a good 27 inches, pushing 8 pounds, probably not 8. I've caught salmon that exact size. Well, I went off on the bank and just sat for a long time thinking, you know, this is the hole. This is the fish of a lifetime. It's one of the most beautiful days you could ever have on the river, although it's, you know, a good fishing day is overcast and rising barometer and gentle wind and lots of insects. I didn't like that, but it's gorgeous. The way today is gorgeous. And I thought and I thought. Later on, Jay said, why don't you write that story for my anglers group in Chicago? We've got a little newsletter. I said, well, it's the least I can do, so I did. And a friend of mine read it and said, why don't you write that story for Big Sky magazine? It's a good Montana story, and they'll probably pay you something. I thought, that's a better idea. And I did, and forgot about it. And a couple of years passed, and an editor from New York was out in Livingston on vacation and picked up an old copy of Big Sky magazine and read the story. He called me up and he said, would you like to do a book on this? And my first instinct was, no, I would not. I've already been through the mill on this. I wrote Fire on the Mountain, which is about a fire that was very much like my father's fire, the Man Gulch Fire. You can stand outside here and see Man Gulch practically. Take a look at the sleeping giant, it's right on the other side. There was a fire in 1994, the South Canyon Fire. There was a mirror image of that. Big mountain in the background, just like Willow Mountain and Man Gulch. Colorado River down at the bottom, just as the Missouri River, both named for states, is in Man Gulch. The fire behaved the same way. The fire crews were caught the same way. The guy who was the leader of the fire crew was a smoke jumper from the Bitterroot Valley. His family lived in Hamilton, at the mouth of the Bitterroot, mouth of the canyon there, that is a feature in one of the stories in A River Runs Through It. That's the ranger, the cook in the hole in the sky. I mean, how many hits do you want? So I wrote Fire on the Mountain. This is going to be a little painful, I think, at times, because I did it as differently from Young Men on Fire as I possibly could. I did it straightforward, nonfiction narrative. Young Men on Fire is straightforward tragedy. You know, different kind of things. But I still had some people who said, oh, you're just, you know, following in your father's footsteps. You wouldn't get anywhere without him, blah, 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 blah. That has died out. In fact, it has died out completely. Because I hung in. And first of all, the book was better than that. And secondly, I've hung in with 5 books about wildland fire that are recognized in the fire world and in the general public as being something that nobody else is ever going to do, and very worthwhile for the wildland fire community. They are used for training. They are still read. They are still recommended to fire crews, and they still have some cachet in the general readership. I spent yesterday with 3 members of the fire lab from Missoula, the Forest Service Fire Lab, and they are the ones who have formed a cadre to investigate wildland fires, because the investigations have been really screwed up, as I have pointed out in book after book after book. And when they were getting this together, they called me up and they said, would you talk to us about how to run a fire fatality investigation? And, yes, all puffed up. So I talked to him on the phone. I said, there are 2 big things you should look for. One is you've got to go back to people after you interview them. You've got to show them the transcript, Tell them how you understand it. Ask them to comment on that. If they don't understand that, say, no, you've misunderstood what I had to say. Or if there's a contradictory account, you've got to show them that so that they can say, well, see, he said this, but that isn't really what happened because he was looking to the right and what was happening was to the left or whatever. You got to start checking this stuff or it's going to continue to blow up in your faces and people are going to continue, like me, to write books about how lousy a job you did. That was point one. Point two is you've got to come up with something, plan B, so that when there's a dangerous situation and someone with great authority, and these crews are authoritarian crews and have to be, drop your tools and run. You automatically do it. It's just automatic. They've got to have a plan B. When they've got a lousy situation and the supervisor says, well, we're going to go down there and fight the fire, you've got to be able to say, not just say no, which is what came out of South Canyon. There are times when you refuse. That's a refusal. That's a repudiation of authority, and it can get you fired still. It's not enough. You've got to have something legitimate that says, let's wait a few minutes, let the fire go by, and then we will re-engage it. I said, I don't care how you phrase it, but you've got to have something like that. And after listening to my thump, 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 sorry, said we're doing both of those things already. We're moving on both of those. So we had lunch at the cabin yesterday, and we're going to do things together to try to make this happen, try to make that fatality process, investigation process more credible and make it work. You're not going to eliminate deaths on wildland fires. It is simply too dangerous out there. People will die, but you can limit them. And you can give the people who are in one of those horrible episodes a credible, reliable fire report that satisfies them. Okay, so I've been through all that. So when he said, you know, do you want to turn this fishing story into a book? I thought, that's going to be compared to A River Runs Through It. I don't think I want to go there. And we talked about it, and I understood what he wanted, which was just kind of a nice book about fishing and the outdoors and kind of friendly. Then I started looking at what I had already. After my dad got old, he was famous. You know, he didn't start writing until he was 70 years old, and his book didn't come out until he was 73. So it took off, and these things happen slowly. They don't happen overnight. So he's way into his 70s, and people are inviting him to come talk and collect a prize and be a great man, and he couldn't do it. So I would go, and I would give a talk. And I discovered what people really wanted to hear about was what was it like to fish with Norman Mclean. And so I wrote that, and then I would be invited somewhere else, and I didn't want to just repeat myself, so I'd write it differently. I wound up with a pretty good stack of stuff about all kinds of things. And it was a nice cache to have. And I had the story. I had the story about this big rainbow trout. And I said, yeah, all right, let's do it. So it evolved in kind of neat ways. I talked the editor into a lot more than he wanted. He was talking about 80, 90 pages. It's a 250-page book. Now I said, you know, as long as we're doing this and it's going to be compared to A River Runs Through It, let's imitate something that I really like in A River Runs Through It, that is imitatable without getting in trouble. And that's the wood engravings in the first edition. If you ever see that blue book, there are wood engravings at the head of every chapter, and they're beautiful. By chance, right before I got the assignment to do the book, a fellow had gotten in touch with me who was doing an essay on the illustrations in A River Runs Through It. And he couldn't get a hold of the guy who had done those wood engravings. He was an artist for the University of Chicago Press. He didn't even know if he was alive. He would have been in his 80s. And he said, the University Press isn't helping me. Would you help me? I said, let me see what I can do. And we found him and talked to him. And there's a wood engraving on the cover of that book of a big cliff and the river going by and some landscape background. And people have always wondered, where is that on the Blackfoot? Because we can't find anything like that. Well, if it isn't on the Blackfoot, it's in Montana at least. And so we asked this guy, Robert Williams, what is it? And he said, I made it up. And my dad had told me that he brought back the illustrations from Montana and that they basically did tracings, and that wasn't what happened at all. He brought back illustrations from Montana, and this guy created the ones that are in River Runs Through It. So we got our own artist for Home Waters, Wesley Bates, a Canadian and a wonderful illustrator. And he did wood engravings for each of the chapters and for a facing page. This isn't cheap, by the way. And they ran out of money before we got it all done, and so I had to throw some in, and I did. I said, oh, let's do this right. You know, you only do this once. And then I got even more ambitious, and I said, you know, what this needs is a map. And I don't mean a topographic map. And I don't mean a hokey-pokey map. I mean something in between. It looks a little old-fashioned, but you know, it has a cowboy and a fish, but it has all the places in Montana where these things happen. And so we got that, and it's on the end papers, which for some reason you call what's in the front of the book, as soon as you open up, that's called an end paper. And you can have an end paper at the beginning and at the end, and we've got it in both places. So that was a lot of fun. Then I got to the part where I had to deal with my father's brother, my uncle, Paul. And Paul has always been a shadow person for me from the time I was a little boy. Their dad was going to name me Paul. Thank God my mother intervened and didn't let that happen. And I've learned a lot from Paul. Like him, I became a newspaper man. I fish, he fished. But I've also learned from the mistakes that he made, which were fatal. And one reason I like the movie, you're not supposed to if you're a fisherman and say, not good enough for me. One reason I like it is that families can watch it. And the kids identify with Paul. Brad Pitt, who wouldn't identify with him? And they know that you can't act like that and get away with it. Something bad's going to happen. And when it does happen, they don't have to see it. Their noses are not rubbed in violence. It happens off camera, his murder. But his murder didn't happen in Montana, as it does in the book and it does in the movie. It happened in Chicago. And I came back to Chicago after being a Washington correspondent, and I was a big shot. I was the foreign editor of the Chicago Tribune. And when you're that in Chicago in those days, you are a prince of the city. And I had a lot of entree. And so I began collecting stuff about Paul, documents, reports, and had quite a cache. So when I came to write about it, I said, I'm going to write about this the way I wrote crime stories, because this is a crime story. And I'm going to put in things that are reliable about his death without trying to solve it, and I did that. So Home Waters answered a lot of needs. It got a story in there about the fish that was a big deal for me personally. It got Paul's story in there. There are a lot of moving parts in it. I don't know if there are too many. If it has a fault, that's it. But I've been very heartened by the success that it's had with people who like it. And as the bookseller in Livingston said, you know, we have a right to feel good about some things. And I'm very glad that the book has had that effect so far. Thank you. We're going to do questions.
Do you have any questions? Don't let the microphone scare you.
Well, I'm curious about your father and Ivan Doig, because they both went to Northwestern.
My father and who?
And Ivan Doig.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just curious whether they knew each other, because of course Ivan has written a whole collection of books as well, of which a lot of them were historical, although they're fiction. So I was just curious if they knew each other at all, because I think they're similar in age. I'm not positive of that, but Ivan happened to be the same age as I am. So I've read all the Ivans, but I have read the River runs through it too. So I'm just curious of that.
The simple answer is yes. There's a photograph of the two of them together at the cabin in Montana. It was not a close relationship. My father was a professor of English and standard English, Shakespeare English, Wordsworth English, and he didn't like the style, Ivan's style, very much. But Ivan was a Montana writer, a successful one. He brought honor to the state. His papers are now the primary collection at Montana State University in their library there of local people, which is one of the reasons that I am leaving my papers to MSU. There's some others in there that are important too. So they brushed against each other. They're both smiling in the picture.
Any more questions? Oh,
What's the history of your evolution into your
You have
expertise?
to really speak up. I'm nearly deaf.
Yeah, I'm curious on the evolution of your expertise in wildland fires.
Oh, well, actually, I wrote about that when I was a reporter. I did a series on below-cost timber sales when that was a big deal. Then my dad died before Young Men on Fire was completed. And it fell to the family, myself and my sister, to decide whether even to publish that book. We know that he knew that he had had a horrible time with it. I used to call him up from Washington, how's it going? And he said, oh, the book, it's a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Those of you with biblical backgrounds, which I hope is every single one of you, will recognize where that came from. The early version of it, he was trying something, he's trying to do what I do. He tried initially to write a straightforward narrative, nonfiction narrative. And I couldn't write a tragedy like Young Men on Fire, and he couldn't write a straightforward nonfiction narrative. It was a horrible mess. And people who had championed him as for A River Runs Through It told him, this is a mess. And he got very angry with some of them and broke off relationships with them. And then he went to work on the thing. And when he died, it was unfinished in a way, because it was jumbled, still badly jumbled. We took it to my sister and I, Jean and I, took it to the University of Chicago Press. They put a young editor on it, Alan Thomas. And he looked at it and he said, well, it's going to take a lot of work, but this is the way a lot of books look when they come in. This is, it's a process. So he went to work on it, moving things around. And when he'd finished, I talked to him about it, and he said, the only thing I rewrote there was 3 sentences where I had to write a transition. He said, the rest of it is stuff your dad wrote. I said, well, would you please write a memo saying that, because you know and I know that we're going to be accused of having rewritten his book for him after he was dead. And we haven't done that. It was rearranged. And so he wrote that memo, and he also wrote a memo that's in Young Men on Fire. about the editing process. So, well and good. In the course of doing that, I had fact-checked it. And I remember sitting at the cabin doing it, and I had over 100 edits called. It's not rewriting. It's the kind of thing I do on my own book. You know, you go back, and it says here that this is a quote or a reference to something. Go back and double check it. And I had 100 edits or more. And my sister did it. And Laird Robinson, who was my father's research partner and a smoke jumper foreman who got injured and went into the Public Information Office in Region 1, who was with him all those final years and made all of them possible. Laird and I became close friends. He was like a son to my father, and I didn't mind. And it was like that. And he really supported the old man. And he worked on it. So a lot of work done on it. And in doing that, I got into the wildland fire world. So, and I got to know a lot of people, in Missoula especially, where the fire lab is, and at the smoke jumper base. So when I started doing Fire on the Mountain, I had a pretty good head start. Not in specific knowledge. I had to learn the whole thing. And I went to class. I took the basic wildland fire classes. I qualified as a firefighter. I then qualified and did everything except the final thing to qualify as public information officer on fire. In fact, functioned that way a couple of times. And I was around it and immersed myself in it. And that was the point of doing it, was that I wasn't going to have to, well, I got, you know, another hour on this, and then I got to go do something on an obit that was tossed on my desk. And no, that was all I had. I'd quit the Chicago Tribune. I was done with them. I was living at that cabin at Seeley Lake 6, 7, 8 months a year when it got really cold. And it's a summer cabin. You can see through the chink gate. And I slept in the same bed that my dad had slept in and nearly frozen to death in when he was doing his work. Finally got rid of that bed. Got a horrible thing. Mattress about like that. And what I found in the bed was some old newspapers that he put in there from the 1970s as insulation. And my sister wanted to throw it away, and I said, no, leave it for me. I've got an idea. That bed is now in the Lookout Tower mock-up at the Smoke Jumper Museum in Missoula. In that, you know, a 14er, they've got this bed is in there. That's the one that he slept in when he was riding a river runs through it. It's there. So I went into total immersion and kept learning, and I'm still learning. I was off fire for about a year or more because of home waters. I had worked on a project for 8 years on the Yarnell Hill fire, and it just fell apart earlier this year. And I was missing fire, you know, but the guys at the fire lab, guys, 2 women and a guy at the fire lab have kind of hooked me back in, and I'm just very happy to have them doing what they're doing, which is going to save lives. I mean, it is, and it's going to save people's psyche. When a bad report comes out and you've been there, your friends got burned to death, you were in trouble, you want something to come out that tells you in a solid, authoritative way, this is what we can know about this. We may not have the final word, we may not know everything, there may be mysteries, but this is what's knowable and solid. And you don't have that now. People refuse to be interviewed now without a lawyer. It's gotten that bad. And I've helped do that by exposing the ridiculousness of some of these fire investigations. See, in the old days, they would have a list. They said, well, we're going to do this properly. We're going to come up with a list of senior people in the Forest Service. And when your number comes up, you go out to the next fatal wildland fire. Well, this guy may have nothing to do with wildland fire, and he's got another big job because they took senior people. He wants to get out of there. You know, 60, 90 days is too much because stuff's piling up on his desk. It's not his fault. You need a cadre assigned to this full-time who learn how to do it. And that's what they're doing. I mean, I talked to some of these people who ran the investigations, and they were traumatized. No, you come out with a report, and the people who were there stand up the next day and said, no, that's not what happened. You're going to have to go back and redo that. That interview you had with me, you got it all wrong. You know, your tape recorder wasn't working very well because that isn't what I said. And that happened a lot. So to try to straighten that out is great. So I've had 27 years formally, from the time I started on Fire on the Mountain till now, working on fire. And I had Young Men on Fire before that. And as I said, you know, when I started out, people were saying, you know, who the hell are you? You never done this. Your dad did it. You didn't do it. You know, you can't write about it. I said, yes, I think I can. And yes, I did. And I'm still up and screeching my head off. Where are they?
Way back in the corner.
I'm loving every minute of it.
All right, thanks. I don't sound good on a mic, but I've always wondered about your dad's book, The River Runs Through It, that it starts with religion and fly fishing, but at the end of the book, it's only fishing. Did he maintain the faith, or his religious outlook throughout his life?
Deb, repeat that.
Yeah, is that better? Is that a little better? Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering about your, in the beginning of River Runs Through It, your dad talks about religion and fly fishing.
Yes.
At the end of the book, it's just, he's in the river fishing. You don't really hear too much about his faith or if he retained that. It seems like he kind of has it in the river where it's like his soul and his spirit, you know, his being in the soul. I'm wondering, did he retain the Reformed, Presbyterian, Westminster thing?
Oh, he had a complicated religious life. I mean, he grew up in a very strict Presbyterian home, and his father was a Presbyterian minister and kind of the archetypal one. Very authoritative, and so on. He had to break away from that. He adored his father, and he found a way to separate himself from him. The Reverend Mclean's brand of Christianity was for a long time 19th century Victorian Christianity, where the B-I-B-L-E was the final word on everything. And toward the end of the Reverend's life, my dad, who had been to the University of Chicago and had cast off some of those shells, would talk to him about things like Darwin's Origin of the Species and the fossil record and things like this. The Reverend was a scientifically capable man and no fool. And he acknowledged that maybe Mr. Darwin had something to say. But it was conversations like that. My dad had no formal religion at the end of his life. But we had a family friend, an Episcopal priest, Father Peter Powell, who was an expert on the Plains Indians, which is how they got together. And a deeply religious man himself. I'm an Episcopalian, and he and I were very close. And he said that he thought that A River Runs Through It was the most Christian document he had ever read outside the Gospels. So you can take the boy out of the church, but you can't take the church out of the boy. And River Runs Through It is infused with that, you know, a love of the universe, and a sense that there is spirit alive. Again, it's that lyrical realism doesn't compass that, but it certainly allows for that. You know, taking the very solid things of reality, like the fossil record and evolution and all that, but step it up. You know, don't stop there. Get bigger than that. I've tried to figure out why a river, Big Two-Hearted River, which is often compared to A River Runs Through It, the two are often put side by side, why it's lasted 100 years. Because it's a mystery story in a way. and the mystery is never solved. There's an image at the beginning of Big Two-Hearted River of this town and the surrounding area that had been blackened by a wildfire. And it's never explained why that's important. Why is that a metaphor of? What is it a metaphor of? It's shocking because it wasn't expected by the one character in the story, Nick Adams. Gets off a train and the whole place is burned down. What the hell happened? Then at the end, he's fishing and he finishes fishing and there's a swamp ahead of him. And he says fishing in the swamp would be tragic. It would be tragic to fish the swamp. Deep, dark currents. It never says what the deep, dark currents are. You know, what is he talking about? And is the magic of that what keeps the thing going? Is it the mysteries that keep it going? They've certainly kept academic debate alive for a long time, but that's not it. It is this almost hallucinatory sense of reality. Nick Adams, in his fishing trip, Norman Maclean, in A River Runs Through It, things happen very precisely that are realistic. You know, you learn about casting in A River Runs Through It on a 10-2 and all that. But that isn't it. This isn't a manual of instruction on how to cast a fly. It is something lyrical that comes out of that. And that's what happens in Big Two-Hearted River as well, where it's raised up. And there is a religious sense to that, a very deep religious sense. It's spirit that lifts us up. And it's there.
What a great question and a great perspective. Are there any other questions? I'm going to walk around, but
In some ways, this is a follow-up to the last one. Can you hear me?
Barely.
Okay. Well, the closing passage of the book is almost poetry. It's one of the some people think it's one of the great passages in the English canon of literature. I'm wondering, and I was very intrigued by your mention in the book of the fact that part of the image of the Great Flood invoked came from the geological flood from the glacial era, that massive flood that came across the landscape. I wondered if there are any other of those little nuggets in terms of the timeless drops of water and that type of thing that you had to give away in the metaphors in that
Well,
passage.
in the realm of lyrical reality, I have the timeless drops of water. My father had a piece of shale that he kept as a memento on his little table with precious things. And you crack the shale and you see the year, aeons ago, when rain hit it, and there are the marks on it. And we had the piece was about that big. And my sister and I looked at it. Who gets this? And we cut it in half. So I have that in my desk. Yeah, the timeless raindrops are true. But again, it's lyrical realism. He had an actual piece of shale with the timeless raindrops. But when you read that, that's not what you read. You don't say, well, the guy's got this thing in his hand and he's looking at it and he's describing it for me. No, you're off. All of a sudden, you're into something very different. Are there more things like that in there? Over and over and over again. Pick a page, open it up. It's all like that. Big Two-Hearted River is all like that. A lot of great literature is like that. You're not just in those words. You're off the page. In literary criticism, they think that they're inventing things all the time, and what you're doing a lot of the time is reinventing stuff. Understating, and because you understate, things get bigger. That was Hemingway's whole theory of writing, the iceberg theory, that here's what's in the story, here's what's not in the story, and it's what's not in the story that makes the little bit on top powerful. It's a very, very old idea, and he expressed it extremely well and made a whole theory out of that. I'm trying to think, spinning while I was talking, trying to think of some clear examples where that happens. And I would just suggest you go back and look at it with that in mind, that where do you start from something very tangible, but your reaction to it is intangible? And I think that is a measure of great writing. Yeah, and there's a lot of that in there.
We could go on for another hour, but our
I'm
time,
running out of voice.
our time is up. I just want to say, not only did John make it into Wikipedia, but there is a festival named after his family. The Mclean Festival is going on in Missoula right now. John, you're going to be speaking
Sunday at 4:30 at the Wilmot.
Yeah, and so that's going on. If you want to take a road trip to Missoula, love to see you there. Thank you so much, John.
I hope you all feel better.